We're going 4 ways in this episode. Me and 3 guests with the Democracy Defense Project, an organization of swing state former lawmakers who have come together working to protect election integrity and preserve our democracy. The 3 we have with us today are former Republican Representative Melissa Hart of Pennsylvania, former Pennsylvania GOP Congressman Jim Gerlach, and former Democratic State Representative Keith McCall, who is also House Speaker. With them and others, they're working to preserve Pennsylvania's election integrity. We get into what their concerns are leading up to the election in November and their concerns writ large about American democracy. Take a listen. Thank you for joining us on the Postindustrial Podcast. I'm really glad to have all 3 of you on here at the same time. It might be a little bit of a logistical challenge, but it'll make for a lively conversation. So thank you very much.
Great to be here.
Okay. So just to kick it off, let folks know, what is the Democracy Defense Project and what are you trying to achieve? And I'll kick it off by saying, Melissa, you go first.
Okay. Yeah, what we are is a bipartisan group of former elected officials who want us to focus on getting people involved in voting and to reinforce the fact that in Pennsylvania, there have been a number of reforms and efforts made to make sure that our system is secure, basically encouraging people to, quit with the rhetoric and look at the facts, because we have a very good and very secure system here in Pennsylvania. People need to vote. They need to trust our system.
And that's the important thing, Carmen. I mean, the bottom line is that we have to restore confidence in our electoral system. There's just too much distrust out there, and it's prevalent today. We still hear it today. And that distrust is rooted in misinformation and lies. And that's the thing that we're going to try to combat with these forums, talking to the public to say that we do, in fact, have a safe election system. As a matter of fact, I go as far as stating that 2020 was the safest election we've ever had in the history of this country. We now have, and it was because of federal legislation. We had, in my when I voted, I voted with an actual mechanical machine where you go in, you pull the lever, and you drop the names down the lever, and pull the lever back. I love that system. It was to me, it was foolproof. But there was so much controversy over how elections were being run and how we were all using different types of machinery to count ballots and to or to cast our ballots, that we went to we now have a voter verifiable ballot that people cast today. Every single ballot is voter verifiable, and we conduct 2 audits to verify those results, not only at the county level, but at the state level as well.
Yeah, and it's important, Carmen, to understand that this effort here in Pennsylvania by us 3 plus former Governor Rendell is also being replicated in a number of other battleground states across the country, including Ohio, Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, where they've brought together, again, former elected officials from both parties to underscore the importance of trusting the system and turning out to vote to register who you want to see be your elected officials in the coming years. So it's an important effort, and hopefully we're going to be able to have some good communications with people across Pennsylvania between now and the election to underscore that.
Well, we have Democratic and Republican former lawmakers on this conversation right now, and the Democracy Defense Project has a bipartisan list of former lawmakers who are endeavoring on trying to protect democracy and protect our elections and restore faith in both. I noticed on that list, you mentioned the other states involved, all swing states. The very first name on this list, and I was talking to Keith about this before we started, what is former governor of Arizona, Jan Brewer, who was never any friend particularly to the Obama administration. I remember that time that Obama visited Arizona, and she stuck her finger in his face. Just as he got off the plane, she was already telling him that she was displeased with, I'm assuming it was over immigration and border security. How is it now that you're able to come together from both sides of the aisle to tackle this difficult dilemma that America is facing, particularly in these swing states?
I'm
Yeah,
happy,
Good.
Carmen, I'm happy Jan Brewer is there, because I think she helps to validate what we're doing. Because of we want to look bipartisan. We want the public to know that this is a bipartisan effort, Democrats, Republicans coming together to tell the truth. And I hope with her presence and her stature in the state of Arizona, that when she starts, whatever platform they use in Arizona, starts reaching out to the public to talk about the misinformation and the distrust in our system and what we're doing and just educating people on what we're doing to thwart that. I think it's a positive to have Jan Brewer.
This is a state by state effort on purpose, because each state is responsible for running its own elections. So we've met, for example, with our Secretary of the Commonwealth, who oversees and works with each county elections board to execute on the election. And so what we've seen and what we've participated in so far is an understanding of what our processes really are here in Pennsylvania. We're trying to get the public to understand this is not a mystery. It's a very open process. The Secretary of the Commonwealth is Al Schmidt, and he, interestingly enough, is a Republican appointed by a Democrat governor. So this is a very bipartisan process. But my point is that he's working with the county elections boards to make sure that they're properly executing on their responsibility. One of the things that concerned me when I joined this group was, what about the drop boxes? How does that work? It seems to me like anybody could just take 20 ballots and dump them in. What we've learned is that the process for drop boxes is still handled county by county, but what the secretary has done is put out guidelines to make sure that they're manned or cameraed so that there can't be any shenanigans. My county, actually, I observed directly in Allegheny County, where it's even more secure in that the drop box itself is almost like a mobile election poll where there's staff. They check signatures. They check it off just as if they were going to vote an election. So I think it's important for people to understand that the shenanigans, at least in Pennsylvania, are not going to be able to happen if these counties are following the guidelines of the secretary. Now, we've tried to get the legislature to do some changes legislatively that would be mandated, but they haven't been willing to take up this issue. It's just too hot right now. But for us, and for the discussion, we're raising awareness. And I think that's important because you'll have people who either on the left or on the right were saying, well, I don't trust this person or that person. But it's the process, and that they have to follow the process.
Carmen, I think it's important that we should at least explain to the public that there really is no room for loopholes or shenanigans or tricks in the counting process. It's a very mundane process. The polls close. When the polls close, the workers tabulate the votes in the polling places. There's a minority judge of elections and a majority judge of elections. There's poll watchers. Every candidate that has their name on the ballot in that precinct has the ability to have a poll watcher inside the room while they're counting and tabulating those votes. That tabulation of those votes, they have to affirm it. They have to swear and attest to the tabulation. That goes to the county. The county board of election then tabulates the county's results, okay, by precinct. They'll take all the precinct results and then tabulate the county's results, and then they send that to the state board of election. And the state board of election does the same thing. County by county, they take in all the results, county by county, that have been affirmed and attested to by the workers. And they actually do all the math to make sure all the math is correct and all of those things. The county board or the state board of election then certifies if everything is good. And then the governor signs a certificate of election declaring the winner. So there's no room for really any playing or manipulation of those ballots. They're counted by machine, not by hand. And the public has to understand, Georgia did 3 counts. On the third count, Trump or Biden actually got more votes when they did the hand count. 367,000 ballots. It took them 5 days, and they had hundreds of people counting those ballots. The machines count them in literally in hours, and they're 0.5% accurate, whereas a hand count is 8% less accurate. So the machines and mechanically counting them is much faster and much more accurate than having a person involved in it, believe it or not. But people have to understand that there is a very, very tight process, and it's open. It's open to every, like I said, every candidate could have that's on that ballot in that precinct could have a watcher, and they're watching, as well as the judges of elections and the machine operators.
Some county election officials in swing states have already said that if Trump doesn't win, they won't validate, certify the vote.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say to those people, that those county election officials in these swing states, when they are already saying 7 weeks before the election, we're not going to certify? What's the solution?
The courts.
Well, I think we may see some of those situations develop here this coming election, hopefully none in Pennsylvania. But we also have a system, in addition to what Keith just mentioned, we have a system whereby if there are legitimate reasons to dispute an election result in a particular precinct or a particular district or a particular county, then we have a judicial system that then is empowered to rapidly review any challenges to those reported election results and have a judicial disposition of those claims. And ultimately, if those claims are legitimate, a judge has a power to deal with that. However, a judge might also find that there is no validity to that challenge and be able to then, as part of the overall process, lead to a certification of the election result. The other thing that I found in participating in DDP's efforts here is the state runs the elections, but it's done through the counties, as Melissa was talking about, but it's done mostly in the counties at the precinct level by tons and tons of volunteers. And what I'm fearful is if we keep disputing cycle after cycle after cycle, those that aren't successful claiming that somehow the system robbed them of an election result that they wanted, we're going to continually find that there'll be less and less, or fewer and fewer, people willing to volunteer to be part of our electoral process. As Keith mentioned, we have folks able to be in each precinct from both parties to be able to physically be there and watch the process unfold and register any legitimate objections they may have that ultimately can be handled through the county election board or even by the local court with appellate ability as well. So for all of the complaints that are out there, I think ultimately at the end of the day, we have a system that can be relied on. And even if you think you have a legitimate objection, we have a judicial process to handle that on a timely basis. So ultimately, whatever the result is from that, people should feel as if that's who won the election and that's who's going to be in office for that term.
I think,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, just real quick, I wanted to add something. So we're talking about the counting right now, but I think the other issue that the public has really raised, and obviously the Congress is talking about now, is who's voting, who's able to register, and who's able to actually vote. And it's very clear that Pennsylvania has put a system in place to prevent people who are not legitimately qualified to vote from actually registering to vote. And it's interesting, a lot of us were concerned with motor voter that it seems like it's trying to push everybody who has a driver's license to also be a registered voter. But there's a lot of people who have driver's licenses in Pennsylvania who are actually not citizens and therefore not eligible to vote. So what our system actually has in place is if you are a non-citizen with a driver's license, there's a special number assigned to you. You don't get the same kind of driver's license number that I would get as a citizen. And so if that person would then jump to the registration part, they're shut out of it. They're locked out of it. So very difficult for an actual citizen using their own, information to be able to register to vote.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And let me buttress that a little bit, because it's something that as a board we've taken a stand on and wrote letters to the legislature about it, and that's pre-canvassing. Interestingly, Governor DeSantis had a presser yesterday or the day before, it might have been 2 days ago, and he said, finish the count election night, because that's where the doubts come from. The doubt comes from the delay in getting these ballots counted. And when everybody else in the country is announcing their election results, and Pennsylvania is still waiting for the ballots to be counted because we don't allow pre-canvassing. We don't start counting our mail-in ballots until 7 o'clock in the morning on election day. We need the ability to count our ballots early so we can tie that in with the in-person voting, because people think something nefarious is going on when 5 days later, all of a sudden there's a batch of mail-in ballots coming in and it turns the election the other way. They think there's something corrupt going on. And that's one of the things that, we wrote to the legislature to say, allow for pre-canvassing so we could get our election results in on time so people don't think something underhanded is going on.
Yeah, that makes sense in terms of, especially in this era of hyper-partisanship, and which extends also into our news media coverage. When the election isn't decided that night or the next day, yeah, that's when the rumors start spreading. Now,
Right.
all three of you have served Pennsylvania, either at the state or federal level. And I'm sure you still have plenty of colleagues in the State House and on Capitol Hill. What do they say about the current state of play in politics, in terms of the partisan divide and getting things done? We were talking before we started recording about how people used to be able to reach across the aisle. Everyone was friends after 5 o'clock. Democrats, Republicans could go out to dinner. You can't even imagine that now.
Yeah.
What do you say to those folks when they're telling you these stories? I mean, is it hard for you to even comprehend because you've all been out of office for a little bit now?
No, it's pretty easy to comprehend being involved in campaigns as I am now. There's a lot of things that have changed, but one of the main things that I think is a problem for us, then I really do believe needs to be addressed, is where the money comes from in politics. And what we see now are candidates who are almost controlled by outside groups, whereas when we were running, the most powerful, at least until the end, the most powerful campaign was us. It was our campaign chest and our decision and our speech. But now the speech comes from without. And I think a lot of that has caused problems where the members feel like they're pressured by these outside groups a lot more than we ever felt. Now, I lost my election based on a huge sum of money coming in from an outside group, moveon.org. So I think that we need to get the federal government to address changes in our fundraising and who controls campaigns, because when you have these outside groups controlling campaigns, you have members who really are powerless. Yeah. They win or lose based on the decisions of some multi-million-dollar PAC, and that's inappropriate. It's important.
I'm sorry.
And it's, there's these arguments, constitutionality, money is speech, and all these things, but there needs to be a drilling down, and the Congress really needs to take that issue up again. I throw that in there because I think that's part of why you see such stark divisions. We were more independent as members than they are today, because they can just be taken out by some super PAC.
I think I won my first election on about $25,000. And now we run races in the legislature that cost millions of dollars. It's ridiculous. She's absolutely, Melissa's absolutely right. There's way too much dark money involved in campaigns anymore. You got to take the money out of these campaigns. Let these candidates hit the streets like we hit the streets, and door to door. And I hit every event, every fire company, every church social. I went everywhere and did everything, and did it on a shoestring budget. And today there's just too much money and influence outside of what our realm that is influencing these elections, and we have to get that money out. And the other thing that I'll say is that, we started to become, a house that didn't want to compromise. It was my way or no way. There's compromise in politics. Everybody has different points of view and different opinions. And you have to take those points of view and opinions and work together to come to a common solution. And we don't do that anymore. And that's why there's such gridlock and just finger pointing all the time, because nobody talks to each other. Nobody wants to compromise. It's my way or no way. And that's not how politics works or should work.
Right.
Yeah, I'd add, and it really ties to the money that Melissa and Keith just mentioned. But I can remember back when, if you won the election in November, you got sworn in January, you'd have, if you were a 2-year term, you'd have maybe that first year to just do your legislative work, your constituent work. And then as the next election cycle started rolling around, Then you start building into a campaign in that election year.
Mhm.
But, for at least the last 10, 15 years, we're in the era of the permanent campaign. You get elected in November, you get sworn in January, and literally, as you're being sworn in, there's ads being run against you if you're in a competitive district in your local media. There's mail pieces. There's never an end to the last campaign and the start of the next. It just continues on and on and on. To continue to try to work to, if you're on the other side of the aisle, try to raise the unfavorability rating of that incumbent. So you try to make them more vulnerable for the next cycle. So this era of the permanent campaign, with the infusion of the incredible amounts of money coming in from people, organizations that don't have to be reported to the FTC, has led to a lot of that. And I'd add one other thing. Maybe I'm getting too old now for all this stuff, but I think we have, frankly, a lack of character-based leadership anymore. And I'm not pointing to any party or anybody individually, except for the fact that we just don't seem to have leaders anymore that are willing to just get up in front of a camera and tell the truth of what's going on. And then, to Keith's point, say we're going to keep working with all parties in our legislature, in our Congress, to try to come to a common sense solution to move forward. That character-based leadership is something we seem to be very wanting in our society these days. And hopefully the pendulum of politics will swing back to the middle and we'll start those kind of leaders again at some point.
And Jim is so correct. We have to add honorable back. We have to get honorable back into that realm. We carry the title honorable when we get elected, and we should act honorable when elected.
That's right. And one of the things that, to build off what Jim and Keith just said, I think if you take the average person who was in elective office when we were in elective office, they would not fear ever speaking with the press. They would go back and forth on an issue and actually understand each issue in detail, because we needed to deal with how is that going to work for our constituencies and explain it to people. We had town meetings in public all the time. You don't see it today, where as many of them are really willing to answer questions directly. I mean, you see one guy running for president who meanders, and then the other one who just won't talk to the press. So it's not helpful to the public, and it certainly doesn't build confidence when they don't see that person who's a candidate really getting down into the weeds to discuss, hey, I'm for this issue and this is why. And we're not hearing those kind of details, and the public really is deprived really of depth in this time.
Right.
In this era of hyperpartisanship, let's say you could turn back the clock or move up the clock, let's say, and get back into politics, be it the state or the federal level, with things being as they are right now. Would the three of you want to put yourselves out there and be into politics? Let's say this was your first campaign in 2024. Would this be the kind of climate you would want to serve in?
I'll give you my answer, and my answer is an emphatic no. I cannot believe the political environment today. It's disheartening, to be quite honest with you. And again, and it boils down to the misinformation and lies that are out there that you just can't squash them. But I could never put my name on the ballot again. No.
Well, especially when you couple that, most people don't understand the amount of time and effort that goes in to a legislator, and we're all legislators here on the call with you. If you're particularly in a competitive district, it's a 7-day-a-week job. And so when you're not in Harrisburg or you're not in Washington, D.C., you're back in your communities working different festivals and events, and making visits to businesses and making visits to community centers, and setting up events and information forums for your consent. It's a 7-day-a-week job. And then to go for a part of the week to Harrisburg or Washington and have that gridlock and that partisanship constantly confronting you, when you put all that together in its totality, that's what makes it difficult to say I'd want to do it again. Right. Because you're working 7 days a week to represent your constituents in your communities, but also try to advance legislative policy as best you can. But if all that is for naught because of the partisanship that exists in the legislative processes, plus all that work you put in away from your family, away from other things you'd like to do personally, then it makes it a situation where, is this really worth the effort? And for far too many people anymore, it's not worth the effort.
So I put my name on the ballot in 2022 as one of, I think, 9 who were running in a primary for governor. And what I learned actually, and this is Republican electorate, I never had primaries when I was in because I always was a Republican in Democrat districts, but this was my first primary experience. And what I learned was that there's a lack of understanding as to what an elected official's responsibilities are. There were too many people who were demanding sort of allegiance to one person or a specific ideology that was so narrow that it didn't make any sense for governing. And so I think what we're losing and what we've lost is, and Jim and I are involved in a civics education effort. I think that there's a big problem out there with the public and especially younger people. I don't think they were really taught about what our system is supposed to provide. That they're taught about being activists and they're not taught about our process and how the process teases out solutions based on discussion from different points of view. And that's the way it's supposed to work, with people who have ears and mouths. But what you hear today are people with mouths, and they just really aren't listening to each other.
I appreciate the efforts that you're making, again, across the aisle, Democrats, Republicans working together on this endeavor. Do you feel confident that we can get through this next election, through the Pennsylvania race and the federal race writ large, with greater success than we did in 2020, without having the awful insurrection and the rest of the doubts cast on our system?
I go to church a lot.
Well, I would say I think our state election officials and our county and local election officials are much better prepared this year than they were in 2020 and even 2016. That's a very good sign. But it's going to, by all polling, it's going to be a close election and perhaps may come down again to a couple thousand votes here or there in various areas of the state. And so hopefully we have a strong and resilient process in place that will manage us through that. And that ultimately, at the end of the day, whoever wins these elections can be viewed by all voters as being legitimate in their office that they're going to be holding. And we're there to hopefully continue with that dialogue from our perch to help us through this process here in Pennsylvania.
All right, Keith, I'll give you the last word. What do you think?
Well, I think there'll be people out there that are going to question the election and the results. I really do. But I think the system that we have in place is strong enough to combat that. I have confidence in our electoral system. I have confidence in our poll workers. I have confidence in the way we canvass and certify and attest to the vote. So, yeah, I think you may hear some rumblings on election day only because of, again, the delay in counting our ballots. I think we'll hear some of that, but I'm confident that we will have a free and fair election in Pennsylvania, and the results will be certified and accepted. But if I could say one other thing is to thank the election workers as well. They're still under threat. We still have election workers that don't even want to work the polls anymore in my county, and I'm sure across the country, that they can't take the threats. I mean, their homes and their person is being threatened from people who are listening to that misinformation. So I want to take the time to say thank you to those election workers, because they're our neighbors, they're our friends, they're people that we know in the community, and they donate significant amounts of time to make sure our elections are run free and fair. So yeah, I think there'll be some issues, but I think it'll in the end it will all come together, and without the problems that we had in 2020.
Yeah, the system was brand new then, Carmen. I mean, so, all of a sudden we had COVID, people were really unsettled, and then all of a sudden you can't go vote. And so I think that really contributed to a lot of suspicion because it was a new process. Now we've had a couple of national elections, well, at least federal and state elections now having a national election after a couple cycles, it helps, I think.
Yeah. I agree.
Well, not only do these election workers need to be thanked, but I want to extend a thanks to all of you as well, not only for your past service, but for your current efforts to try to protect and preserve our democracy and our free and fair elections, and for joining us on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Well,
Thank
thank you very much, Carmen.
All right.
Thank you for helping us getting this message out.
Yeah,
My pleasure.
appreciate it.
I want to thank Melissa Hart, Jim Gerlach, and Keith McCall for joining us on the Postindustrial Podcast. And I want to thank you for checking in as well. Be sure to go to postindustrial.com and sign up for our free newsletter. Thanks.